Welcome to OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript. I'm your host, James Snell, and
I'm Matteo Collina.
Today we are talking to Laurie Barth, staff software engineer at Gatsby, technical blogger, and member of the TC39 Educational Committee, for insight into life as a Gatsby maintainer, what it's like to be involved in a project with so many moving parts, and how open source can be sustainable.
And I think what people are aware of for things that do a lot of pre-rendering is that what you gain in runtime, you can sometimes lose in build time. And that's been this kind of tipping point for certain sizes of sites where it just wasn't feasible for them to be able to build something with tens of thousands of pages or even millions of pages, because if you have to rebuild the site every time you change a page, that's just completely untenable.
Laurie explains what she considers to be a key benefit of the open source community and how it can benefit all open source projects.
I think leveraging the community is really useful. If you create a culture of docs and then something like the Gatsby style guide, which gives people really clear guidelines for what docs should read like and what types of docs there are, and then contributing guidelines, I'm hopeful that the community will step up because I feel they have for us quite a bit.
We're getting into it, and you're coming with us. This is OpenHive.JS from NearForm. Welcome to OpenHive.JS, our podcast on all things JavaScript with NearForm guests. I am James Snell, and I'm joined today by my colleague Matteo Collina and our guest Laurie Barth for a chat about life as a Gatsby maintainer and the challenges of a project with many moving pieces, team members, contributors, all kinds of things. Hello, Laurie and Matteo.
Hi.
Hi. So, Laurie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Laurie Barth. I am a staff software engineer at Gatsby. I've been in this industry for about a decade now, so I feel like I've done kind of a weird number of things. I was a consultant for many years, and most people who may have, interacted with me before probably know me as a content creator. I do blog posts and conference speaking, and I'm an egghead instructor. So lots of various techie things fill up my day.
Whoa, what a story. I also see you've done some TC39 stuff from your profile.
Yeah. So TC39 created what they call the Educators Committee probably about a year ago or so. And the idea is to make the brand new additions to the spec a little bit more user-friendly and discoverable for people. So our goal is to write those things up and share them in various formats so that people can understand what's up and coming or what has just been added to ES Next.
As someone who reads specs for pretty much all the time, that is an absolutely wonderful and brilliant.
Well, I can't. Every time I look at that TC39 spec, I'm wrestling my head for like half an hour to understand the syntax.
I like the specs, so it's fun for me to translate it for people who don't.
No, I like them. I read them, but every single time I have to relearn it because for some reason my brain can't really stick that in. Anyway,
completely understand.
Which part of Gatsby do you work on?
$1 million question, right? So actually, when I joined Gatsby, I joined the learning team working under Marcy Sutton. And so I was doing kind of a little bit of DevRel, huge parts of our documentation efforts, both on the cloud side and the open source side. And we restructured probably about 3 weeks to a month ago now. And I moved over to being an engineer on the themes team, which means I do less documentation that isn't on the features that I'm building, a lot more code, and a lot more kind of product-centric, what's the future of some of these fun things that the themes team does. So the themes team has a terrible name because we don't just build Gatsby themes. We're also working on recipes, which is a newer feature that people may be aware of. We have the maintainer of the Graphql project, which Gatsby leverages, and Max Stoiber is working on some fun Canary stuff that might be out soon.
Whoa, lot of stuff.
It does, bring pleasure to me. I'm someone who's not very familiar with Gatsby. I've always known it as an open source project, but I mean, but there's obviously an organizational structure that there's a company there, that kind of thing. Not being very familiar with it myself, kind of what is that model for Gatsby? What is the relationship between the company and the open source project?
Yeah, so Gatsby as a company was born out of the open source project, but the founders, Kyle Matthews and Sam, have kind of maintained from the beginning that they wanted to create a model of sustainable open source. And in order to be sustainable for both the maintainers and the community who benefits from this project, you have to make sure that you have some kind of consistent financial backing, for lack of a better word. And so they envisioned the idea that Gatsby, the company, is all of this. It's the open source framework, but it's also all of the tools that Gatsby Cloud is building to make building a Gatsby site faster, more accessible, and more reliable for people, so that we can, I think what people are aware of for things that do a lot of pre-rendering is that what you gain in runtime, you can sometimes lose in build time. And that's been this kind of tipping point for certain sizes of sites where it just wasn't feasible for them to be able to build something with tens of thousands of pages or even millions of pages, because if you have to rebuild the site every time you change a page, that's just completely untenable. So the idea of Gatsby Cloud is to move forward in a way that you can build larger and larger and larger and larger sites leveraging the Gatsby framework, but that you're no longer making those concessions in build time, and that you're getting to a point where you can truly have the runtime experience, the performance, the built-in accessibility, the plugin ecosystem, the content mesh, all of these things. You can leverage all of those things, but you can also have your site live in seconds from a change that you made in your CMS. And that's really cool. And obviously I work there, I'm biased, but I'm excited that we're going to be able to couple these things together and make it a really cohesive experience for Gatsby users, from the development experience all the way through their site going live.
Right. Okay. So so someone can go use the open source project, host everything themselves, do everything themselves if they want, but the Gatsby Cloud is looking to solve a lot of those issues and a lot of their headaches that they may have a lot.
Right. And Gatsby Cloud is, I just want to be clear, Gatsby Cloud is a build tool. So Gatsby Cloud doesn't do any hosting for you. We have great integrations with a ton of hosting providers like Netlify and Fastly and Firebase and all of those things, where you can automatically build in Gatsby Cloud and it will automatically deploy to those hosting endpoints. But Gatsby Cloud is really focused on the build time. So I know we talked about this before we started recording, but the big new feature is Incremental Builds, which runs on Gatsby Cloud. And that gives us the ability to only rebuild the data that you've changed. So you go into a CMS like Contentful and you write a new blog post. You don't have to rebuild your whole site. You only have to rebuild the part of your site where data has changed, which is really compelling, and you no longer have to struggle with the fact that a singular typo isn't going to be live for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Whoa, 30 minutes seems long.
Well,
I've seen worse.
Right. Well, 30 minutes is not the average use case. That's for people who are working on millions of pages.
Yeah, it's no, but I'm joking. But a long time ago, I was working on some project where we were able to we were so happy to have a release time of 30 minutes.
Times they are changing.
That was a big milestone. Well, we were building EC2 images from scratch or something like that, so it was pretty fast, to be honest. But it was still whatever. It was still long. It's fantastic when you can iterate quickly, and in case you make a mistake, it just gets updated and so on. So pretty nice. Cool. So is there? I was browsing through the themes. What is a theme in Gatsby? Because this was recently released as well, right, or something like.
Actually, at this point, it's maybe almost a year ago, but it feels recent
Okay.
to me too. So Gatsby themes are very similar to Gatsby plugins. They are a type of Gatsby plugin. If you're familiar with the kind of plugin ecosystem that we have, the difference is that themes come with their own Gatsby config file. So they are basically a mini site. They can orchestrate all of their own stuff, and then you insert it into your site, and it's almost like an extension or a kit or a package that you can use. Not a package in the node module sense, package in the like general sense. And what I like, what's interesting and maybe somewhat confusing, is that they can do a bunch of different things. So they can be kind of how we think of WordPress themes, where they're really just display. So CSS, maybe a little bit of JSX rendered or HTML. They can be data layers, so they can source information for you. They can do both. So what's interesting about themes is everyone is a little bit different depending on what you want to package up. There's this theme that I'm working on right now, which is the Gatsby theme blog, which is the idea that you can set up an entire blog just by including this theme as a plugin in your site. And all of a sudden you have a blog listing page, and anytime you make Markdown in the right folder structure, you have a blog post, which is incredible and really, really nice functionality that you don't have to build yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, blogs are something that I know going way back, and it's always been a painful process to get that consistency and to get everything set up. So this is nice. Having that really out of the box drop in is fantastic. So you mentioned that the data sources and stuff. From what I I know that GraphQL is used quite a bit. Is that still the primary kind of data source? I mean, or is Gatsby set up to use pretty much anything developed?
So GraphQL is kind of it's almost like a firmware layer in Gatsby in a weird way. So GraphQL is how we source all of the data, but that doesn't mean that that's where the data is coming from. Right. So it is always, anytime you're sourcing data in Gatsby, you are always doing it through GraphQL. It allows us to make a bunch of assumptions, which allows us to, again, improve performance and make some unilateral decisions when we're building your site, which is nice. But the data source itself can, really come from anywhere. You can build a source plugin for yourself. You can leverage one. There's source plugins for GitHub and Twitter and Instagram and Contentful and, a real scary number of things. I think it's like 500 or 1,000 source plugins now, which is wild. And then you can build them for yourself. Actually, my coworker Kyle Gill just did this really incredible docs workflow. There's a tutorial and a reference guide that walks you through how to make your own source plugin, leverage all of the, image processing and performance benefits, and make it hot reload when you're in develop mode, and all of these really, really cool things. So if you don't find what you need, we also have a step-by-step guide for you to build what you need, which is, nice.
We can also include this into the podcast description or whatever. So if you, it will be there.
Yes, I will get that link for us.
Thank you. That would be awesome. So I just wanted we were talking a little bit about GraphQL, and I know it's probably like very, very deep down from you. Both James and myself are really Node people. We work on Node.js performance, and probably a few layers deeper than that. What few layers down from what you work on normally. Have you ever heard about there is a nice library called GraphQL JIT, built by folks at Zalando, that can automatically compile the GraphQL query to JavaScript so they run faster?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the library from a name standpoint. It's not something I've played around with in particular. For all I know, it could be somewhere in the repo, and I just don't know about it. It's a large repo.
Yeah, I can definitely.
One of my favorite pastimes is trying to prompt Matteo to make stuff faster, and so it's always anytime we see like GraphQL or something in there, it's it's like, okay, we have to make this faster. One thing I would love to do like with Gatsby is, I mean, it's like incremental build and all these kind of things are fantastic, but it's just for the fun of it. Let's see if we can make it faster. So we can.
Well, hey, then you should become friends with Peter Vanderzee. He is our performance expert on the core team, and his list is a mile long, and everywhere I turn, he's making everything faster. So you have a kin on that one.
Nice.
Okay, fantastic. So, oh, go ahead, James.
I was going to say, in terms of like getting started, right? Like I've said a few times, I'm new to Gatsby. So how would I get started, right? Say I'm setting up a blog, right? Start from the user, get started from the user point of view, but also from there, making the leap to developing and contributing to the project, right?
Yeah. So we have a lot of different paths to start, and it really depends on what your experience prior to coming to Gatsby looks like. So for people who are brand new to development, and Gatsby is kind of their first foray into that, we have a tutorial. I'm going to get the number of steps wrong. I want to say 10 or 11 steps. And it starts from what we call step 0. And part 0 rather. Tutorial part 0 is how to install Git and Node on your machine.
Nice.
And that's where it starts, because those are things that we take for granted as developers, and we don't recognize that, like, oh yeah, I know how to get, the setup steps ready for this.
Yep.
Alternatively, you can start later on in the tutorial, but we have kind of a few different paths for getting started with your site. So one is you can use a starter, and a starter is a snapshot in time of a site that you can clone. You can use the Gatsby new command. It'll clone and do your installation for you, and all of a sudden you have a skeleton site that you can use, and it has functionality for pages, and it's including some of the most common plugins. We have varying starters. So we have some starters that are for just a default site. We have starters for working with the blog theme. And then we have a starter that doesn't use the blog theme and has all the blog code directly in that page for you to do more customizable stuff in that site. And then there's the brand new way of getting started, which, hot off the presses. We recently released something called recipes, and the idea of recipes is that it's a command you run in your CLI that will run a bunch of setup steps for you. So if you were to say start with a default starter, or even a Gatsby site that you'd created for yourself, and you didn't want to set up auth for yourself or work with setting up the blog theme for yourself even, you can use Gatsby recipe, whatever the name of that recipe is, and it's going to run all those steps for you under the hood. It's kind of like a Terraform for front-end project scaffolding. I'm really excited about it. I get to work on it, so I'm, again, a little bit biased. But that's yet another way that we're trying to make it lower the barrier to entry for people to be able to get started, so that you don't have to understand Gatsby Node.js. You don't have to understand Gatsby config even. You really just need to understand how you want to mess around with your JSX for now. And then as you get more comfortable, you can leverage these other features.
Right on. Okay. No, yeah, the recipes.
So, James, are you convinced?
Am I what? Am I done?
Have you convinced?
Well, the site's already done, right? Just as I was listening here, just. I'm definitely convinced. Explaining it as kind of Terraform for front ends actually makes it click really well in my head. Yeah,
I started as a full stack engineer. I've done a lot of DevOps pipeline stuff. So when it was, I did not come up with that. Kyle Matthews did, and as soon as he said it, I was like, okay, this makes sense now. Got it.
Yeah, we got it. No, this is it's fantastic. Having those, you mentioned the parts that we take for granted, right? The just installing Git, that kind of thing. It's been countless times, I've sat down with customers and stuff like that and say, okay, well, do this, and this, and see them sitting there for a minute and like, oh wait, I have to, because you take those little bits of of information, especially when you're super familiar with something already, right? And you just take those things for granted. So it's good to see that that you're getting started goes all the way back to those basic principles.
Yeah, so I'm working on an error message right now. I'm messing around with Gatsby plugin theme UI, which is the ability to leverage the theme UI design system. And I was working on a message that takes into account what package manager you have set up and says, hey, you need to install this thing because we're doing a Webpack require for you. And if you don't have this in your dependency tree, that's not going to resolve. And I had this moment of clarity where I was like, oh my goodness, the number of new people, or I mean, honestly, even people who have been around the block for a while who aren't necessarily able to distinguish between what is Node and what is Webpack is really interesting. And so giving them a very explicit command of saying, if this error runs, just run this in your terminal is super important because it's hard for people to understand those distinctions depending on where they're coming from and what their background is. Because, they could be the best Java developer in the world and Webpack is going to leave them scratching their heads.
Well, I know if we can repeat the Webpack some more times, we will have Sean Larkin joining.
Say it at least 3
Hi,
times.
Sean.
Pop up.
So, Webpack. We'll see if he joins. Anyway, it's I definitely know I can't understand Webpack, to be honest. So it's
challenging. It's and honestly, it's interesting to me. This has nothing to do with Gatsby, though maybe it will in the future. It's interesting to me. I've seen people working with Rollup and Snowpack and those things, and I'd love to dive into them a little deeper and see where they differ because people have joked for a long time, but Webpack is pretty complicated. It's doing very complicated things, but it's always nice to see iterations on that idea.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of getting some competing ideas out there and having all of those kind of contribute to making everything better across the board. It's fantastic getting those mix of ideas. Okay, so that's the getting started in using Gatsby.
Right.
What was your experience in getting started with Gatsby, the open source project, and how would somebody get involved in that project and start contributing?
Yeah. I want to say it was Hacktoberfest 2 years ago. So this was before I worked for Gatsby, the company. I had spent an entire kind of like Christmas break. So I was a consultant, and at Christmas, everything shuts down a little bit. Oh, yeah. Just, there aren't meetings happening. People are on vacation. And so I took on this little pet project of migrating my personal site from Jekyll to Gatsby. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had never used Gatsby before. My friend Jennifer Wadella had already done this. She had worked her site from Jekyll to Gatsby, and so she sent me some resources, helped me out a ton, but I probably didn't leverage those as much as I could have because I didn't know what she was talking about because I was just completely new to the paradigm. So I worked through doing that migration and in the process wrote up all my notes, and I did this 3-part series of a blog post, which we can also add to the show notes, that was about that migration, moving from Jekyll to Gatsby. And the third part of that series really focused on Gatsby image and how to source and use images that can take advantage of the built-in performance that Gatsby has.
Right.
And then Marcy Sutton and the rest of the learning team wrote up an issue on GitHub saying, hey, we really need someone to improve or create a tutorial for Gatsby image. And I had just written this whole post that was kind of exactly what they were looking for. And I wanted to force myself to do some open source contributions. So I wrote it all up, and I thought it was brilliant and amazing because all I had done was change this part 3 of the tutorial to them. And of course, I got 5 million edits back because Gatsby is really great about their docs, and they have a style guide, and they're like, hey, we should do it this way for consistency. And I learned some things, like I was including Gatsby image in my Gatsby config file, and you don't need to do that because it's a plugin that's giving you a component rather than being something that gets configured or run. Or it's a package that includes a component. So all of these things that I learned, right? And they merged it. And I became a when you get stuff merged into Gatsby, they give you like a swag code and say, hey, thanks for being a first-time contributor. And it was really fun. I really enjoyed the experience. And about 6 months, maybe a year later, they had that opening, the staff software engineer opening on the learning team, and I applied for it. And then I became a maintainer who was in PR reviews and issues literally every day of my life. So the rest is history, I guess.
Fantastic. Considering the number of think PRs that between James and myself we review, it's every day. I don't know. It's I feel you. I don't know if somebody will tell you I feel you. It's fantastic.
I call it the fire hose.
Yeah, it's. By the way, the new GitHub notification thing is fantastic. So just.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that. I haven't played around with it that much. I'm a terrible person, but I've worked so hard to cultivate all of the read and deleted emails that I get from GitHub notifications that I use that to track my history, and I delete emails one by one by one, which is maybe not as sustainable as other people would like. But when you're in it every day, I don't know. It works.
I gave up. At some point, I got promoted, and then I had to give up on email notification for GitHub because there were too many. I don't know. Like I didn't. I had no notifications this morning. I've cleared all my GitHub notifications this morning, and right now I have 52.
So I send them all to their own email folder for what it's worth. They do not clog up my inbox. That would be untenable.
Wow. Okay. It's massive. It's it's different strategy works for different people. But I find the new inbox works pretty well for high traffic maintainers.
Since we've been on this call, I have 9 notification emails, so about 25 minutes. That being said, I recently I had myself removed from the automatic learning tag since I moved teams. And when I was on the automatic learning tag, that was every single docs change. And that would have been, I'd have 100 emails right now.
Yeah, I can.
No question.
I can definitely imagine. It's so fun. It's so great. The Gatsby doc, it's so great. And I would really love to get the same help and love to the Node.js docs. I don't know if you have checked out the Node.js docs at all, but
I have.
Yeah, you have. Okay.
So it's interesting. You, as Node.js, I think there are a couple of unique challenges. One of them is how often you release minors and majors, and how, depending on what version of Node, the life cycle of a Node version is quite long. And so the ability to make sure you're on the right docs for the right era is a challenging problem to solve. Yeah. Actually, I think Angular did it kind of well. They have this drop-down picker on the top of their docs page where you can select what version you're on and get the same version of that documentation that's specific to that version of Angular.
Yeah, that was. I can't remember exactly when it was within the last year. That's been added to the Node documentation, and it's absolutely phenomenal. It's like I'm so happy.
It's hard, right? It's hard though, because that means every single time you do a new release, you need to look at every single doc and make sure it's still right.
Yeah, true.
So, I will say, I think leveraging the community is really useful. If you create a culture of docs and then something like the Gatsby style guide, which gives people really clear guidelines for what docs should read like and what types of docs there are, and then contributing guidelines, which, is pretty popular in the Node space. I'm hopeful that the community will step up, because I feel they have for us quite a bit. And now that we have this bar to reach for with Gatsby docs, I think whenever a doc falls below that line, we hear from the community before we realize it ourselves, which is really amazing.
So one of the things that we do with Node, is whenever any PR, any technical change is made, if it changes API surface, the doc change has to be also covered in that same PR. So generally, the docs end up being written by the person who just wrote the code, and that's good from a keeping it current point of view. Not necessarily great from a generating great doc point of view, right? So what is the process for Gatsby? And are docs separate? Are those changes done separately from the code changes, or are they done in lockstep?
Yeah, it's interesting because that's kind of evolved and honestly is still evolving. When the goal, of course, is for new features to include docs in those PRs, and I think our team has been really great about trying to take that to heart and make sure that they do that. That being said, even if you document every brand new feature, that doesn't account for how things work together, or more newbie friendly documentation, or advanced kind of architecture discussions. So there's always this layer of docs for use cases and integration points, for example, that are really valuable to people. And I think that's where having designated team members who are not just looking at the docs themselves, but about the overall learning experience. So kind of how the community is reacting to docs and features and where they need more help, where there are points of friction, or products that we're releasing where people are saying, hey, this isn't really working. Like, I need more help for understanding how this works. Having designated people listening to those sources of input and then acting on them as their job is many, many levels of valuable. But it's obviously not a luxury that everybody has either.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an area we can get so much better in Node. I mean, it's docs are probably one area where we have been the most challenged. Just going back for throughout the lifetime of the project.
One of the greatest problem from my point of view that and I would like to understand how Gatsby was able to avoid this to some extent, if it's avoiding it. We have seen in Node.js that it's full of, from my point of view at least, it's full of articles online that recommends to do things that I would never recommend to my worst enemy.
Yes.
Like, it's just literally shooting themselves. Like, there is literally active people that are spreading, and I've seen that pattern copy and pasted. Like, and we work in consultancies, so spread along different code bases, like a little like a virus that keeps spreading, and it's and then people suddenly they have problems and things do not work, and it's just like, well, of course you did this. Well, you've read it there, like.
Yeah. So we are very grateful to our community for. I mean, people have written thousands of blog posts, and there are Egghead videos and Udemy courses and all of these different things. But I think it comes back to, we have such a canonical resource of docs that people come to our site first to look for best practices. Right. And that includes lots of example repos that are actually code samples of how this stuff should, quote unquote, ideally work. And so when you kind of elevate the Node site, or in this case, the Gatsby site, to the source of truth for these things, blog posts are super beneficial. And when we've failed at documentation, that's where people are going to go. But if we have a doc for it, they're probably going to come to us. And then the blog posts that are written and the video courses that are made are all based off of our recommendation in the docs rather than self-discovery. So I think you see people deviate from best practices when they're just trying to make something work because there isn't a well-documented way for how it should work.
Yeah, I can't argue with that in any way.
And again, the Node footprint for what you need to document or would want to document is incredibly wide. Yeah. But I definitely think there are ways that leveraging the community to help fix those holes could be incredible. And I mean, obviously, I'm a JavaScript developer. I would love to see it.
Oh wow, it's definitely it's. I would love to see, like, to some extent. It's. I'm trying to saying always the same thing all over again to some extent, but that's my problem. So it's kind of interesting to see that it was. I have a feeling that with Node some of the stuff was we missed a little bit that opportunity because of how fast it went out and how fast it grew. And now it's everywhere, and they're full of tutorials, 3, 4, 5 years old, that people are still following, which are completely like recommending the wrong thing.
Yeah. No, and actually, this leverages a point I was just I was talking to my coworker about just the other day. He was releasing something, and he said something to the effect of, "Well, it's still really early days. We don't expect any open source contributors yet." And I said, "Okay, the minute it's open source, you're going to get contributors. Not having docs doesn't prevent that. It just prevents the experience from going well." And I think using stuff that has an API or a best practices way, so whether that's a language or a framework or whatever, releasing that and expecting people to do it the right way is probably a bad assumption. And it's why docs are so essential to first releases, because even if they're rudimentary, you can always iterate from that point.
Right.
Leaving them out ends up causing, the long-term harm that maybe you're seeing right now.
Oh, don't tell me. Like, we're still moving.
Mateo's like, I am a convert.
I am a convert. No, I have already, that we are still in the process of removing and deprecating undocumented fields in Node.js.
Yeah, because people went off and
literally
those. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Still... I think I happened to cross one the other day. Actually, I think I was on the Node site and it was like, "This is deprecated." I was like, "Didn't know that."
Yeah. If it's got an underscore, you're not supposed to use it.
Everybody still uses that stuff. We have a very long, we can't break everybody. So as much as I would love to, by the way, we can't really break everybody. I try every single release. We try very hard. We fail. That's, I don't know. We have a very strong process to actually, catch those regressions. In fact, there is when Node 14 came out, I found two regressions. We found two regression the minute the build was finished. By the time the build was started to the build was finished, we found two regressions. Okay, so just to and the Node build requires, when we do a build for Node, is all those platform stuff takes forever. So I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's actually what I really liked about I started at Gatsby under the learning docs experience umbrella. I feel like it has given me such a greater appreciation for what Gatsby users experience and what is, going to seem intuitive and what isn't. And so when I'm working on some big changes for the blog theme, as I mentioned before, and I'm trying to make stuff that is, one, well documented, but two, if you don't read the documentation, does it work as you expect it to? And it's nice to be able to kind of do those broad strokes, reimagining pieces.
Right. Yeah. So, this is a fantastic conversation. I don't want to cut it off too early. We are at 36 minutes here, so don't have too much longer. But it is an opportunity. I mean, talking about contributions and working with the community, it does give me an opportunity to kind of circle around to a topic you mentioned earlier that's really near and dear to my heart, and that's open source sustainability. Mm-hmm. Right. Just you personally, what would you consider to be kind of like the key to keeping these open source projects sustainable?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of benefit from the fact that I joined a group of people who had already thought about that, right? It is a challenge, and honestly, I think we're seeing people all around us struggle with it right now. I mean, really big open source contributors who are saying, it's so much work, and I'm not really seeing a return on investment. I think it's interesting to see people like Kent Dodds, who obviously React testing library used by a ton of people, and then he now has a training business that does some of that. But we also saw a similar pattern with React training, and then with COVID hitting and the hit to in-person training and all of that. So I don't think it is a solved problem by any means, but I like the Gatsby model, and I think people should. I think it's really easy to want to get, the frameworks for free, especially in JavaScript. We're really, really used to getting things for free these days. Yeah. And I think it's compelling to watch a team like Gatsby who wants to do that and also wants to make sure that they can continue to provide that free piece without any financial challenges for the maintainers. So I think it's a compelling use case. I'm behind it, obviously, as an employee, but I hope other people are too, because I think it's exciting to see that maybe this model can allow for more sustainable open source for all of the projects we really rely on right now, instead of having to rely on things like acquisition, which we've seen a fair amount of recently as well.
Right. Okay.
Really cool. I'm just, it's all. I didn't tinker too much with Gatsby recently, but you make me itchy. Is there just one quick question? Is there any resource for poor devs that are not really good with design and CSS?
So
I'm talking about James, by the way.
Yeah. CSS and I do not get along. I can barely line anything up.
Yeah, so this is where I think Theme UI is pretty impressive. So Theme UI was built by Brent Jackson and John Otander and maybe a few other people. It's part of the System UI repo, and it's Gatsby plugin Theme UI leverages it, and it's used in something like our blog theme. But the idea is it does a lot of stuff for you. You define, I didn't understand it until like 2 weeks ago. I've been knee deep in it, and I'm also not a huge CSS person. I try, but maybe not so much. You get to define a theme. So you say all of my H1s, for example, should be this size and this color, and all of my block quotes should be indented this much and have a line to the left of them. And then you import that into your project, and boom, there you go. Everything is styled in this kind of sustainable, consistent way. And for someone like me who doesn't want to have to think about layout, it's pretty ingenious.
Can you put some links? Because we'd really love to hear more, because I don't know, we are so talented with CSS and with CSS and stuff. By the way, NearForm is great at that. We're just James and myself.
I'm just not. I'm so happy we have an actual design team with graphic artists and designers, because my idea of great design is which size black font do you want on the white background? And that's pretty much it. As we wrap up, the one additional question I would have for you is, let's say two. What are the things, like, if you look out over the next year, what are the things that you are most excited about for Gatsby? Kind of new things that are up and coming. And then second, just for you personally, like, what are the things that you're excited to be looking at or doing, working on, even if it has nothing to do with Gatsby, like, over the next year?
I'm excited about consistent improvements in the build experience, just because I think that makes the performance gains, all of a sudden they don't have a negative, they don't have a con to them. I'm excited about recipes and admin that Max Stoiber is working on, just because I love the idea that we're going to lower the barrier to entry for setting up front-end sites. I mean, it's not Gatsby specific, especially recipes. It's about creating new paradigms and concepts for how people work with front ends. And for me personally, I'm excited to be kind of diving deep into code and making compelling experiences for people. I guess it's all an extension of the same thing. I'm excited to think about how users leverage our tools and how we can make things easier for them, kind of across the board. And that's true of the content I create and the code that I write.
Right on. Very, very good. Yeah, it's. I think that's definitely something we share. I mean, I absolutely love creating developer experience. I mean, it's definitely not UI, UX. That's not my area, but creating.
It's okay. We're gonna set you up with Theme UI. We got you.
We got that. But working on those developer experiences and setting something that's hopefully easy and somewhat delightful to use, going forward is I think it's.
And I think the people who understand that best, and part of what I love about having touched so many places within Gatsby before I worked there was, like, I can raise my hand and say, hey, this was a pain. I know you all have been deep in the weeds, and so you just kind of accept this, but it was a pain for me, so can we fix it? And we're joking right now as I join the themes team that they have about a month or two window in which I'm valuable. And then I'm going to know it too well, and I'm not going to have the right perspective anymore. And I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, this makes sense to do 20,000 steps that no one would ever think of doing.
Yeah, it's no joke. I mean, yeah. I mean, that is absolutely spot on. Yeah.
Fresh eyes is really valuable. Definitely. And it's actually why I think Node is probably a great example of where you all could benefit from this. It's actually why I think contributing to open source more approachable for people allows you to get a lot of people with new perspectives, and that's actually how you get your docs to improve, because the more people you have who have this kind of eyes wide open, how do I do this thing, who are able to contribute directly to your project once they figure it out, the better your docs are going to be, because docs are a really, really great entry point into open source contributions.
Yeah, you definitely can argue with that. So I think with that, we'll end on that note. It's an absolutely brilliant note. Thank you for your time today, Laurie. For everyone listening, don't forget to tune into our other episodes of OpenHive.JS and visit us at NearForm.com to stay connected. Again, thank you for everything in the chat, Laurie. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, this was a great time.
Thank you, Laurie, and bye-bye.
This has been another episode of OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript from NearForm. Join us next time for more insights into the open source and JavaScript communities. Until then, thank you for listening.